Well, in the Argosy, you can't see out unless you lean forward. So we leaned forward, both Ian and I did, and we saw this large object.
We popped out of this cloud, and here was this light, but so close that it was almost frightening. You know, what the hell is that?
We have a blind red
I think at the time I described it as being the size of a house.
The Kaikoura Lights UFO event occurred over several nights in December 1978 near the town of Kaikoura on the South Island of New Zealand. It is one of the most well-documented and widely publicized UFO sightings in history, and the largest in New Zealand, one of the Five Eyes members. Primarily due to the presence of credible witnesses. They have radar confirmation, visual confirmation matching the radar, and they have photographic and video evidence from a news crew that actually flew on the second flight and a third flight. Thanks for being here. Please hit the like button. It really helps the channel, and consider subscribing.
Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles.
There's two main dates to this. So December 21, 1978, a cargo plane operated by Safe Air Limited was flying from Wellington, capital of New Zealand, down to Christchurch. The flight crew observed strange lights that appeared to follow their aircraft, also confirmed on radar. The crew described the lights as moving quickly and changing color from white to red and green. This event prompted another flight, so 9 days later, December 30, 1978. So another flight by the same cargo airline on the same route was carrying reporters from Channel Zero, an Australian TV station, and they filmed the lights. For many minutes, the crew and passengers observed bright pulsating lights that seemed to move around the aircraft. Wellington radar again picked up unidentified targets, correlating with the visual sightings. This sighting reminds me of Eric Delgado's video. Interesting point is that New Zealand is one of the members of the Five Eyes program, basically the super secret alliance of 5 nations. So recent reporting from Liberation Times, Pentagon confirms ongoing collaboration with Five Eyes allies on UAP investigation. The U.S. DoD has confirmed to Liberation Times that the United States and its allies within the Five Eyes continue to discuss areas of mutual interest and concern related to UAP. Five Eyes is basically the second most secret classification. You have no foreign, which means U.S. only, so no foreign governments or any people can actually access it. And then after that, you have the Five Eyes. And those are representatives of Canada, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia, as well as the U.S. So that it's actually 10 eyes, isn't it? I've covered major cases recently from Canada, investigated by authorities, United Kingdom, obviously it was Rendlesham Forest, Australia with the Westall UFO incident, and then this one is the largest incident from New Zealand, so another Five Eyes member. The Five Eyes is an intelligence alliance comprising these 5 countries focused on cooperation in signals intelligence. This collaboration enhances the members' countries' ability to share information and conduct joint operations. This reporting follows on the inaugural UAP meeting held in May 2023 by the U.S. government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. This is from a BBC documentary that aired. Let's watch some of these interviews.
And at Air Force Base Woodburn, Ian Uffendell was doing his routine evening patrol.
Well, I was a warrant officer in the RNZAF based at Woodburn, and the night in question I was the orderly officer for the base. And about 11:30 I went out to do my last rounds, something I was always meticulous in doing. And as I got down to the corner of the tarmac here, I saw what I thought was a Bristol freighter coming in to land direct from the beacon at Cape Campbell. And I stopped to watch it come in, and it never came. So after a few minutes, I decided to go up to the control tower and talked to the duty controller. We went up there and he got the binoculars out and had a look, and he said, oh, I think it might be a DC-8 going into Wellington. He said, you can see its landing light beam. And he gave me the binoculars. And I said to him, well, if that's a DC-8, I said, it's just done a split-ass turn in its own length because the landing light's now pointing in the other direction.
Okay, so this is the first visual observation I could see from the ground. And what they notice is the light beam pointing down. And what he says there is, if that's a DC-8, then it just did a split S within its own length. So if you start at the top of a loop and you roll inverted and pull, then you'll end up in a split S if you go the opposite direction. So half of a loop up, it's called an Immelmann, half a loop down is a split S. So he says, if that's the case, then it just did a split S within its own length. So aerobatic maneuver there, he must know, he must be a pilot, and went back the other direction.
And he said to me, oh, he said, perhaps we get in a visit from the little green men. And we both had a bit of a laugh about that. And he said, I think I'll ring the chaps in Wellington radar and see if they've got anything.
We saw targets on the radar, which we should correlate with lights in the sky that what they were, I have no idea. I wish I did. The radar matched the visual sighting in that case perfectly.
So that's the first correlated sighting, right? So visual, seeing the lights, and then matching it with air traffic control radar. They see it, so there's actually something there returning enough energy to actually bring up radar hit. And they should also know where the aircraft are, so no aircraft out there. So basically you saw a maneuver that at least an airline can't do. So the type of object he's used to seeing did something totally different.
There were three lights, a big one in the middle and a small one on either side, and they were equidistant from the big one. They came up and then they did a perfect arc of a circle to 90 degrees, and they moved off in a westerly direction, and they moved back towards the big light in an easterly direction, slowly, periodically sending out these beams of light. And I couldn't help thinking that this was somebody or something searching for something on the ground or out at sea or wherever they were.
This reminds me of Rendlesham Forest incident. Colonel Halt said the same thing, that there was these white lights high up in the sky and sending down these beams of light. He said there were tight beams of light, though, more like lasers. Maybe that's what these would look like from a distance. And that was in 1980. So 2 years, again in December. Could those events actually be somehow related? They seem similar.
We'd had phone calls, mind you, of people who'd seen strange lights in the Hutt Valley. Blenheim were reporting that people had seen strange lights with Blenheim. We had someone else ring us up and ask us if there was an aircraft flying over here because they could hear this funny whistling noise. And then we were seeing these things on the radar. So there was an awful lot of it. This is something different. This is unusual. You know, it was this is, hey, what is this?
In the area at the time were 2 Argosy aircraft on their normal night freight runs. The puzzled radar operators called them up and asked them to keep a lookout for any unusual lights. Over the next 2 hours, both flew along the Kaikoura coast, and both crews were astounded by what they saw.
And then the radar voice came on and said, "Look, we've got something out here on our screens that we haven't identified. Would you care to help us?"
Up to your range of 30 miles is a large target. This one tracked down from Wellington. We saw it go toward 30 miles out from Wellington and tracked down to 60 miles and remained stationary for about 3/4 of an hour and has now moved about 20 miles to the west.
And then he said, "Well, we've got a large object on your port wing direction. Can you see that?" Well, in the Argosy, you can't see out unless you lean forward. So we leaned forward, both Ian and I did, and we saw this large object.
We popped out of this cloud, and here was this light, but so close that it was almost frightening. You know, what the hang is that?
We have a bright red glowing light out there.
I think at the time I described it as being the size of a house burning in the sky, and that's actually what it looked like. You know, like a house fire that sort of intensity of colour, but a little bit pear-shaped.
Okay, so that's just amazing right there. The radar operators call it out to the pilots. And they say, hey, pilots, do you see anything off your left wingtip? And so they lean forward and look out there and see what appears to be like a giant burning house. Some sort of extremely bright, intense object.
Yeah, 2,000 feet above him. Yeah, we can see it too on radar.
The big target that we had out to the southeast came across again, turned with the Argosy and tracked and paced him for a good 10 minutes or 20 miles. I'm not sure what the Argosy's cruising speed was, but it was certainly keeping pace level on the Argosy's wingtip.
Okay, so that is just amazing. That really does sound like Eric Delgado's encounter, where he basically filmed for over 8 minutes, I believe, was a white object off his left wingtip in Mexico. In this case, it's actually tracked by radar. So that is just unbelievable to me. They have radar data saying that, hey, there's something there off your left wingtip. Now it's following you. And the pilots can look outside and say, yes, we see something at that location. You know, that's what pilots and traffic controllers do most of the time, right? Air traffic controllers, their main job is to clear safe passage of aircraft. And so you're used to calling out directions, you know, aircraft 5 miles, you're 10 o'clock, 10,000 feet. You know, they're going to give bearing, range, azimuth, and then altitude. That's BRAW format. So they're used to doing that and calling out these actual objects and then having the pilots confirm it is amazing. And so all the debunkers basically said that this is Venus. They thought maybe it was Jupiter, or they were confused by the military answer is that it was reflections from lights on the ground. But if you don't have any clouds, how's it going to reflect? And are these pilots, are they really going to make those sort of mistakes? So this first event prompted another event. The news from that event spread and then got to Channel O producers.
Other journalist, Leonard Lee, at Channel O in Melbourne, Australia.
I heard a newscast, the 11 o'clock news, and I heard something that actually caught my attention quite profoundly. And it was the story of an encounter here between two freight airline pilots and some unidentified flying objects in the Kaikoura skies that had been confirmed by government radar. As it turned out, we had another New Zealand reporter in our newsroom. His name was Quentin Fogarty. I contacted Quentin and said, Quentin, are you aware that there's been a big UFO encounter over there? And Quentin said to me on the phone, yes. He said, I am aware of it. And I said, I've got permission for you to go and hire a freelance film crew, if you'll break your holidays for a couple of days, and go and do what we call a recap. So Quentin said, yeah, I'll see what I can do. He rang me a couple of 3 or 4 days later and said, look, I've got it organized. I've got the same plane, the same route, but different pilots. And he said, we're going to fly on December the 30th. So I said, fantastic. I said, just let me know the freight number of the film and the sound tapes and send them back with a script, record a voiceover, and I'll put it together back here and that'll be fine. Thanks very much.
I thought the job would be interesting. It was a good story. We were following up a strong UFO sighting. I had an interest in that. But I didn't for 1 second even begin to imagine that we would get involved in something ourselves.
I guess I was quite skeptical about the whole thing, but then I got the call from Quentin Fogarty to say, can I go and do a job? He'd like to go up on the Argosy the following weekend, do the same route.
So Quentin and the film crew prepared to fly a routine Argosy freight trip from Wellington to Christchurch. There would be 5 people on board that night: pilots Bill Startup and Bob Guard, reporter Quentin, cameraman David Crockett, and David's wife Nairi, the sound recordist.
I was a bit apprehensive. When I first got on, it was nothing like I'd ever seen before. And it was absolutely chocker full of newspapers. We had to sort of climb over the newspapers to get to the rear seats to strap in. It just felt like that at any minute it was going to swing away. And you'd pop like that because there were no inside walls, or there was just like a big shell. And it's amazing.
And was actually just doing a stand-up to camera and only got into the first part of the stand-up to camera and Captain Bill's startup yelled down, "You better get up here because the same thing's happening again."
We're now approaching the Clarence River. Just completed the first take, and I think it was Bill who put his head down the hatch and said, "You guys better get up here quickly." So I wanted to get up the stairs, but David wanted to do take two. And if the cameraman wants take two, then we do take two. So we did take two and then went up the stairs.
It's a beautiful, clear night outside, and naturally we'll be looking out for anything unusual.
David started off on the seat here, and Quentin was to the left of him at that stage, and I was just crouched down on the floor behind the seat. We sort of moved around the whole time as David was filming out of different windows to catch the lights.
Went up, leaned over the co-pilot to try and see this object that the radar station from Wellington was telling us was behind us and then coming up alongside us. And so just pressed the button of the camera and let it run.
The very first thing we saw was these sort of balls of light that would just appear in the sky. And I mean, it was really just looking through small windows at a very, very black sky and seeing pulsating lights. That started usually as a very, very small pinprick of light and then would glow into a great globe of light.
It was all right at the beginning, and it was quite exciting that suddenly there were lights, but I had never seen anything as bright as that. And they were like bright lights, and then they would just dip away and then come back somewhere else over a little bit further. But they definitely did not look like a reflection of a light. It was like they were too solid or too, and they weren't the same shape. They weren't the same size. You know, there was like one big light and there was like, a couple of smaller lights.
Okay, so the channel crew sets up the whole reenactment of the route with the same aircraft, and on December 30th, actually immediately sees the same lights. Again, it was a clear night, so weather phenomena, reflections off the clouds. How is that really going to happen if there's no clouds? And again, the radar pointed out the actual contacts. So they got point outs from the ground to where these things were, and then they got recordings. And it's the same. They have multiple lights. So it's not just one light, it's multiple lights. He said, as well as the first witness said, that there was one large light and then smaller ones around. They also seem to come and go, almost like an electrical type phenomenon. But it does get more harrowing. By the end of this, they're not happy to be there. Let's watch.
14,000 feet we were up. Beautiful clear night. No turbulence whatsoever. Zoomed in and out of this object. And I thought it was fairly close to the Argosy because it seemed to be so bright. But when Dr. Bruce Maccabee, the optical physicist from the United States, came down and he did all the analysis of everything, went over the film footage and looked at everything, he said, "Did you know that object was 5 miles from you and probably as big as a 2-story building?"
The flight continued down the coast, cameraman David doing his best to film the lights from the cramped flight deck, and Nairi recording Quentin's commentary.
They're still there. You can see the one to the right of us is still reasonably bright. And it's just about impossible to film them. Because by the time the cameraman gets his focus, knows exactly where they are, they disappear again.
Have commented on my commentary a few times and said that I sounded, very calm, collected and everything. But people who know me, and I myself know that there was quite a degree of strain in that commentary. To people who don't know me, it may have sounded calm and collected, but to me and to my friends and family, I sounded like I was under some duress.
The atmosphere on board was electric and becoming increasingly tense, especially when Wellington radar reported that one of the objects was now following immediately behind them.
From Wellington radar, got an object about a mile behind us and it's following us. Let's hope they're friendly.
Sierra Alpha Echo, there's a strong target right in formation with you now. Could either be left or right, but your target has doubled its size.
So Captain Startup turned the Argosy around in 2 complete circles.
A week or two prior to this flight, we had heard about the Valentish incident in Australia, where Valentish was flying from the mainland to Tasmania and radioed back that he was being zapped by bright lights and everything. And then the audio went dead. They've never found him. They've never found any records. They've never found anything. And I think when Captain Bill Startup got the okay to fly off course towards this object, I think the feeling was amongst all of us, are we going to get zapped?
So they just heard about the Valentich famous sighting. I actually haven't covered it. I'll probably cover it in the future. Let me know if you want to see that in the comments. Basically, a pilot in Australia says that he has something above him, UFO, right above him, hovering, and then he disappears. They end up finding pieces of wreckage years later. And so he's talking about that as they are doing the same thing, essentially going off course to try and find these lights or get closer, try and get photos of these lights that are following them a mile behind. So they end up landing, and then they actually take off again a few hours later to fly back to see it again. And then after that, they don't want to have any more to do with it, actually. They don't want to take off again. I don't think anyone on that plane wanted to do the trip again.
Squid boats don't go that fast. No boat, commercial boat, goes there.
Oh, squid boats go up 380 miles an hour, was it, that the Argosy flew? Oh, gosh, they're wonderful, aren't they? They keep up with an Argosy that's going that fast. And I wasn't pointing down to the ocean. I was pointing the camera level at 14,000 feet that this object was following it.
I think in many ways, the straight reporting of the story initially was fine. It was just after that when you start then bringing in so-called experts and things, and then you bring in people who got airplay, who suggested we had hoaxed it. You know, that when it started to get to that very personal stage where people started to really question your integrity, that hurt.
What it was years ago, we don't know. And that's all it can be. I wish I knew. Well, people can think about that, but they were not on the aircraft.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee did a very good report on it. He studied it for a long, long time, and I think the report was very good. There was some question about the loop that this object did, whether it was camera shutter problem. I checked the camera again after that, and it didn't seem to do that, so maybe the object did do that. It was so quick that I wouldn't have noticed it. The only time I would have picked it up was watching the film.
The interview for TV3 in New Zealand just recently, and, you know, TV3, the producer called me and said, I'm getting these calls from people who say that, you know, this never happened, that it was a squid fishing boat. And I'm thinking, didn't we put that to bed 30 years ago?
Okay, and finally, this is Ross Coulthart on the Singularity Lab, talking about Kaikoura lights and really the disinformation campaign he thinks happened after.
I don't want to sound like a complete nutter, but I think there's been a very deliberate disinformation campaign waged against journalists, against mainstream journalists, to try and discourage them from going into this subject matter. I know, for example, I've seen here in Australia, I've seen documents that show people have deliberately given false information to the media to shut down an investigation into an incident. For example, the Kaikoura UFO incident, which is a 1978. I remember watching this story go to air in New Zealand as a little boy. I can remember this amazing film of these objects coming up to the side of a cargo aircraft flying up the South Island, the coast of the South Island of New Zealand. And I remember the initial excitement all around the world. It just went nuts in that silly season period around Christmas time. And then I remember the New Zealand Air Force shut it down with a report that came out just a few weeks later. And the Prime Minister of the day did a press conference, and it was all announced that it was just inversions, temperature inversions of clouds, reflections of lights off the water. And the claim was made by the New Zealand Air Force that the Wellington Airport radar was faulty that night, and that the imagery that they'd picked up was just backscatter and faulty imagery. That was bullshit. Their radar was perfectly functioning. They were saying that they could see the object in front of the cockpit through the window at the very same time that the guy in Wellington Airport across Cook Strait could see it on his radar in exactly that position. And yet the New Zealand Air Force published a report that was published across New Zealand asserting categorically that this was just a faulty radar. Go away, folks, nothing to see here. And that's something that's happened time and time again. You know, it's interesting to me. I've seen the reality, which is that the biggest and most effective thing of all that stops the media, the mainstream media, from engaging with this subject matter is the taboo.
Apparently, the New Zealand Ministry of Defence conducted an investigation involving scientists and experts from various fields. Initial explanations included celestial objects such as Venus. But how do you explain radar data and the detailed descriptions? Skeptics also suggested optical illusions or atmospheric phenomena as possible explanations. Despite thorough investigations, no definitive explanation for the Kaikoura lights has been provided. This event remains one of the most compelling UFO sightings, certainly the biggest one in New Zealand, and a member of FVEYs. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. It really helps, and it's free. Consider subscribing to get future notifications of when I release videos. And you might like this video. If you want to support the channel, join these great people over here, get exclusive bonus content, then click this button here, patreon.com/chrislehto, or become a YouTube member. If you want to continue the discussion, go to UAPSociety Discord. Links are all in the description. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.